Oh, hi. I'm Christian von Carmian. I was just talking about sisters to the mirror, but now that you are here, I can talk to you about which units to take and how to fight a 1000 point battle with an Adepta Sororitas army. I love games of 1000 points. They are tactical, they often come down to the last few models, and I prefer to play 2 close games than 1 big game which could be over halfway through but you have no time or energy to play again. But you know how I feel about 2000 point games. I will teach you the difference between what is considered good for the meta for a standard tournament size game of 2000 points compared to the 1000 point games so that you can adjust your thinking and your army list for a smaller game. We'll be going over a few potential lists, and while you can take a list I suggest, once you understand how to use it and why the units are included, you could instead use this as guidance for making up your own army lists. Just remember that either way, knowing how to use a list is more important than just having a list of units. It sounds clever because it's almost mirrored. So you'll be pleased to know that at 1000 points the value of power armor goes up considerably, because there are not as many massive cannons, and units with high armor penetration can be considered too expensive for this size of game. 1000 points is quite balanced for most units, in most armies. 2000 points is quite balanced, but for a different set of units in most armies. In previous editions, the Sisters of Battle, when they had been given Codex support, performed better in smaller games. This was because the number of acts of faith that could be performed was limited to once per turn or per phase. But in 10th edition, we can perform an act of faith with each unit in each phase. So finally, it scales. We also get miracle dice, not just one at the start of the turn, which is something that's better in smaller games. Good for 1000 points. We also get them when each of our units die, and if you have a simulacrum when you kill an enemy unit, and having Sisters of Battle squads on an objective. So you can be assured that Sisters of Battle works very well at 1000 points. Imperial Knights doesn't really work that well. But it's a size I know a lot of you play, and 1000 points isn't catered for very often online, and of course I knew from the constant comments on how to play Genestealer Cult at 1000 points, the comments of, when this, but for my girls, I knew this video was needed. For any 1000 point game, we need to remember that they use the same mission cards as a 2000 point game, and there is no modification to those rules or the number of objectives. Your army still needs to take the same number of objectives across the same size board, but you have half the resources to do it. So you won't see 400 and 500 point mega combos. If you see a Necron Overlord with Chronomancer and Crypto Thralls leading 10 Immortals backed up by a Canoptic Reanimator, then rejoice! You have one big block to avoid and a lot of objectives open for easy pickings. We can think of the battle as 5 objectives and pick a unit to hold each of them. Often we need to control more than our opponent or control certain ones, so having fast units to get to where we are needed is crucial. One ability that is often overlooked but performs excellently at 1000 points is Sticky Objectives, an ability that lets you hold an objective after you have left it. So Cabalite Warriors have it, Cadians have it, but no Sisters of Battle or Imperial Agents have this ability, leaving us a bit short. And when you can control an objective without having one of your valuable units there on the site, and when the enemy is not as likely to have as many deep striking units, the Sticky Objectives is really important. But we don't need to hold all the objectives. If you pick 5 units for 5 objectives, we will lose an objective as soon as a unit dies. And as we have said, we may not need all of the objectives at once, just more than our opponent. And they can't hold objectives if they are dead. So I think of 5 tasks, and each unit in the army needs to be able to do 2 of these well. So we're going to be looking at holding objectives, killing enemies, supporting other units, delaying the enemy, and secondary actions. So when we're making our 1000 point list, the units we pick need to be able to do these. We're going to start with holding objectives, and this is how we're going to build our list, a bit at a time so that we have all bases covered. I may not have understood baseball, but I understand 40k. We're gonna want a Sisters of Battle squad because we want miracle dice. While your army can survive without a sister squad, we have no better unit for holding an objective. At 2000 points, I would want the 10 sisters holding the rear objective, perhaps with a Hospitaller for a strong 5+ feel no pain, maybe also with Junith Erutia. That's a powerful block to protect the rear against fast enemy units and units that can teleport and outflank, like Space Marine Scouts, Grey Knights, and the Necron Hypercrypt detachment. With a Flamer Sister, a Heavy Flamer, a Hand Flamer, and Junith's Flamers, this would be the perfect unit for Overwatch because those torrent weapons will auto-hit. But at 1000 points, I don't want to spend 235 points sitting at the back. We could have this block move up the board, then it can hold objectives, potentially kill the enemy that come close, and delay the enemy with the -1 for enemies to hit them from Junith, our 3+ save, and 5+ feel no pain from the Hospitaller. But this is not fast enough for 1000 points, and it doesn't have good long-range weapons to contend with anything not directly in front of them. That is a trait common to most Adepta Sororitas units. So to get the most out of our sisters, and to get some speed, we want an Immolator. The Immolator is great for supporting sisters because it splits a unit of 10 into 2 units of 5. Remember that each sister group of 5 gets a cherub. That is a unit ability, not a model. In the box it's represented by a model. Just remember to put a little token or something next to the other squad to remind you of the cherub. The cherub is very good to just pass a 3+ save on using a miracle dice of a 3 and then hopefully roll up a better miracle dice as a result. Now the Immolator also supports sisters with their speed to get to the midboard and move around to other objectives itself, and it supports the sisters by re-rolling the wound roll for the Flamers. And the Immolator's own Flamers are very good for Overwatch and killing the enemy. You could have multi-melters, but then you risk missing, and you have to hit for the fire support ability to trigger. Also, against toughness 10 and toughness 11 monsters and vehicles, you are wounding on a 5 whether you have Immolation Flamers or Twin Multi-Melters. So I prefer the automatically hitting Twin Flamers, because they're good against infantry and okay against monsters and vehicles. The 5 sisters in the Immolator are going to be the sister with the Flamer, the sister with the Heavy Flamer, the sister with the Simulacrum, one sister with a bolt gun, and the Superior. I would have the Superior with a Hand Flamer. Problem with that is you don't get a Hand Flamer in the Battle Sister box set. You could use one from the Celestian Sacrosanct box that has a Hand Flamer, or you could use a Hand Flamer from a Seraphim box. Now if you don't have them or you've already used the Hand Flamer parts, I would normally say go for the Condemner bolt gun as a ranged weapon, but since we're coming out of an Immolator, the combi weapon is quite nice. It has devastating wounds and anti-infantry 4+, so we can cause a devastating wound against an infantry model on a 4+. Therefore, re-rolling those with the Immolator is very nice. And this is where you may want to spend a miracle dice of a 4. That will depend on you being up against some very tough enemy infantry. If you can, when you get out of the Immolator, make sure that all of the models can see an enemy unit to burn them, and also try and get it so that the 5 sisters are hidden behind the Immolator, because you can't generate miracle dice on an objective if you are dead. Well, you do, but you get more miracle dice by being alive? Oh look, a distraction! The 5 sisters of battle with bolt guns, the rest of the squad will remain on the home objective. They just hang out there and they generate a miracle dice every turn. We want the Simulacrum with the Immolator squad, because then if they do kill an enemy unit, which hopefully they should with the rerolls that come from the Immolator, then you get another miracle dice. So it's entirely possible for the 5 sisters there to generate a miracle dice from killing a unit, a miracle dice from being on the objective at the start of the command phase, and a miracle dice when they die. It is possible to attach Junith Erutia to the squad of sisters in the Immolator. She can be in a transport despite the size of the pulpit and the way she can fly. It's just, fly me closer, I want to hit them with my stick. The disadvantage of putting Junith into a vehicle is you lose a turn of generating a command point. I prefer to throw away a tactical objective every turn to get my command point each battle round. The maximum extra you can get is +1. There's even been a rules clarification for all of the people that didn't believe me when I said, no, Junith gives you the maximum +1 you're allowed. Just because it happens in the command phase doesn't mean it's an exception. Now when you're playing at 1000 points, often you will have secondary missions that you can't do because of lack of units. So you're more likely to be throwing away tactical objectives. So I wouldn't recommend having Junith in a 1000 point army, even though her Flamers would be very nice coming out of an Immolator. Now you may want to protest that I've just shot down a 235 point combo to suggest a 215 point combo instead, But the Immolator and the Sisters give us 3 units that can move around the table and hold objectives, generate miracle dice from holding those objectives, and complete secondary objectives. That is better than 1 unit. And the miracle dice are important. The Immolator and Sisters combo could also be done with Dominions for more damage, as you get twice as many special weapons, and the Immolator could scout up the board to get to further away objectives before your opponent, but there are 3 issues with Dominions. They cost 10 points more than Battle Sisters after the January 2024 points update, and while that is not a lot, we are on a budget. They don't generate miracle dice except through killing an enemy unit through the Simulacrum, and the Sisters of Battle have the same ability. The Sisters of Battle are Objective Control 2, while the Dominions are Objective Control 1. This means that the Sisters are better at holding objectives. And this is why I think Sisters and Dominions should be the same points cost. So we stick with Sisters, not necessarily Dominions. But Sisters and an Immolator, that is how you hold your home base and move up to take over a central objective. To take the enemy home base, we want Seraphim or Zephyrim. Zephyrim costs 10 points more than Seraphim, and while I've just said we are on a budget, this is perhaps where to spend that budget. As established by the way we're building our own 1000 point list, your opponent's home objective is going to be lightly defended, or it will be held by a sticky objective ability, leaving it open for units to land on. Zephyrim can charge enemies on an objective and get the reroll to charge with their banner. Good, but this leaves room for error. Even if you add in a 6 from a miracle dice. True, you would only need a 3+ on 1d6 to make the 9-inch charge, but can you rely on having a 6? When coming from reserve, you cannot be closer than 9 inches unless you use rapid ingress to arrive in the enemy turn 2, but that is assuming that they go first. You arrive, and then in your turn you can move closer. If you need a hand flamer for your Sisters of Battle Superior, the Zephyrim are okay. It allows you to have special weapons for your other units. If you built the Zephyrim, don't feel like you have a dud unit. But I prefer Seraphim. While they do get a squad of 5 in the combat patrol, those monopose models have no special weapons, just bolt pistols on all models except for the Superior. So please get the box set instead. You can get it cheaper than buying through Games Workshop with my affiliate links that are in the video description. If you're in Canada, you can use Fenris Workshop for 10% off. If you are in the UK or Europe, use Firestorm Games to get 10% off. And if you're in Australia or New Zealand, Gap Games gives you 21% off. Be aware that using any of these affiliate links will also benefit the channel, which is a great thing because the amount of people that have bought things in Australia is very much funding the candles required to keep this hall illuminated. I recommend 2 Seraphim Sisters with 2 Hand Flamers. We are clearing away light infantry. It is possible that your opponent will have a vehicle on the home base instead, but that is something you can still charge, and then your Objective Control 5 from the combined 5 Sisters will beat the common Objective Control 2 or 3 that vehicles often have. But at 1000 points, you won't see waves of units making barriers to block deep striking. If there is a Clamavus or similar that prevents deep strike up to 12 inches, then we would use rapid ingress or hit another objective instead. The Seraphim Hand Flamers can clear an objective and then we can move to safety, behind cover, ready to take it in your next turn, because of Angelic Ascent. This is also an amazing benefit if you end up getting Scrambler Fields and there is an empty objective. This mission rule prevents us from deep striking onto an objective, but you could deep strike next to it, and then with Angelic Ascent, move onto the objective. If the enemy is on an objective, and you can't quite make it onto their objective, even with Angelic Ascent, as long as the enemy is dead, that is okay. You don't hold it, you'll get it next turn, but importantly, the enemy would also not hold it. If we are lucky and your opponent left one side of an objective open, after shooting, the Seraphim can move 6 inches, which may be just enough to get into and take the objective in the same turn that they arrived. Nice! Just having the Seraphim makes for a good unit for secondary objectives like behind enemy lines or deploying teleport homers. So they are a unit that can kill the enemy and complete secondary actions. So we have 3 units that can remove light infantry, but nothing so far that can counter vehicles and monsters. Unless you wanted the multi-melters on the Immolator, and even then, I hope you have the miracle dice. You are unlikely to see a non-emissary in a 1000 point game due to the points investment, but something the size of a Carnifex, a favourite from the 10th edition starter set, that is common and it needs removing from the enemy army. If there is something tougher, like the Redemptor Dreadnought that has -1 damage as a special ability, We have a stratagem for that. Light of the Emperor allows you to ignore modifiers, and from the rules commentary, that does include modifiers to your weapons. The only issue is we need to have taken damage before we can use it, but this is now a viable stratagem and more likely to see play. I like exorcists. You may look at this model and think, why would you stick a church on top of a tank? That isn't how tanks are meant to work. But that is not the correct thinking at all. You have improved a church by putting it on a tank. Genius. The Exorcist missile launcher has the strength to wound the monsters and vehicles of the enemy, and it can fire indirectly to shoot from safety against the anti-tank of the enemy. If the enemy has a Clamavus or Infernus Marines that stop Seraphim from taking the enemy home objective, use the Exorcist. This can be one of your main damage dealers. Unlike other faction artillery like the Basilisk, the Exorcist doesn't slow down the enemy, so we need to do one of the other 5 things as well as kill them. It can sit happily on your home objective. Remember, it doesn't need line of sight. Then the 5 sisters with it can get supported with higher leadership from the mobile shrine ability that everyone forgets, you know, the church part of the church organ, or having the 5 sisters advance to a different objective. The more objectives we hold, the better. Getting to an objective in the first turn should be possible with an advance roll of a 4 from a miracle dice. So if you got a miracle dice of a 4 on your first turn, then that is what you should use it on, and then the cherub in the squad gets you a new dice. If you didn't start with a high miracle dice, then you could just remain at the back and the Exorcist could move forward instead. This would be the time where Dominions are useful because they reroll advance rolls and they can scout. So if you felt so inclined, you could choose a Castigator over the Exorcist, but then you would lose the indirect fire to strike at the enemies that are hidden across the battlefield. You would save 40 points though. This is now half of the army. We do need a character to lead the sisters, and I'm thinking of being lore thematic. This number of battle sisters is mission sized, so that would be led by a Palatine. Also, she is very cool. If you are building Seraphim instead of the Zephyrim, I recommend taking a power sword and doing a hand swap so that the character that is all about using a sword has a prominent sword. Let's call this the Blade of St. Eleanor. A good combo. The more attacks you have, the more mortal wounds you can cause. The Palatine can cause mortal wounds with rapturous blows, and it's a great dump for the poor miracle dice. In theory, it is possible to take down one of the bigger Chaos Knights in one round of combat. Not very likely, partly because right now very few Chaos Knight players are taking anything larger than a War Dog unless they are forced. So we have a Palatine, we now need a unit for her to join. That is the only way her lethal hits works. She has to be leading another unit. If we had Dominions, that would be a great choice. The Palatine has Scout, so when joined with the Dominions, the unit can still scout. All models in the unit need Scout for the unit to scout. And she could also go in a Scouting Immolator, which can scout because it is a dedicated transport carrying only models that can scout. Scout. In that case, I would change the flamer weapons of the Dominions for melter weapons because otherwise the lethal hits are just not getting used. Lethal hits has no effect on torrent weapons that don't roll a hit dice. The Palatine in our mission could join a regular sister squad, but it seems a waste to not have the Dominions instead. So I chose Novitiates. Now we have a blender unit that can really clear enemies from an objective. There are 10 bodies between the Palatine and Injury, and the Novitiates are bringing a lot to the table for 85 points. Let's talk their equipment. So the Superior wants a power sword and a plasma pistol. That costs just as much as the bolt gun or a bolt pistol. That's the way points work in this edition. I would have the squad with the Novitiate melee weapons. The autoguns are not doing a lot. The Sacred Banner though, that is important. Being able to reroll an advance roll to get to an objective, or more importantly, being able to reroll a charge roll means that you're more likely to get a combat unit into combat. The Simulacrum is less important, but it's still good. The Palatine should be doing a lot of killing, and if the Palatine kills an enemy unit while she's in the squad, that is the squad that has succeeded with the Simulacrum, so you get a miracle dice. This unit should be tearing through enemies, so let's gain miracle dice from it, which can be then spent subsequently on rapturous blows for the Palatine, or on giving her a 6 so that one of her attacks automatically wounds and causes a mortal wound. You can have 2 flamers in the unit, but we want this unit in combat, so melee weapons are fine. That's where it comes down to personal preference. I would never suggest autoguns over the swords and big hammer things, generic novitiate melee weapons. but that's a personal preference. The Novitiates support the Palatine, and the Palatine supports the Novitiates. The Novitiates gain lethal hits on their low-strength auto pistols and Novitiate melee weapons, and in return the Palatine, who hits on a 2+, is now re-rolling hit rolls of 1, and if the unit is attacking an enemy on an objective, and that is explicitly their job, you can re-roll all hits. If you are attacking something tough and you need 5s to wound, then I would re-roll everything that isn't a 6 to try and get those lethal hits from the Palatine. If you didn't kill the enemy or get charged by another enemy unit, the objective control 2 of the Novitiates help to keep that objective under your control. That is something that Dominions don't have. There is a drawback to Novitiates. This squad is even squishier than a regular Battle Sister squad. While that will mean that our Hallowed Martyr's bonus to hit is more likely to trigger, you can't blend the enemy if you are dead. And shooting is the biggest problem for them, so I recommend a Rhino. While the Immolator and Sisters go for one objective, the Novitiates in the Rhino go for another. This should give us control over most of the objectives on the board, dependent on the success of the Seraphim and the survivability of the Sisters left behind on the home objective. The Rhino comes in the Combat Patrol box, so it is a common unit for Sisters players to have, or it's cheap to buy second-hand from places like Fenrish Workshop. They have a second-hand section which does deliver to the United States. You may think that the Rhino is a lot of points, but this Novitiate and Palatine group is a big damage dealer and worth keeping alive. The Rhino also has a secondary function. Remember, for 1000 points you need to have 2 things that each unit is doing. So the Rhino can transport the Novitiates to get them to a position to strike, and once we have the objective, the Novitiates can move on. While they are doing killing, the Rhino is the perfect unit to complete secondary actions like Cleanse, because you are not missing out on a lot of firepower if this unit completes a secondary objective instead of shooting. This leaves one objective in no man's land that we are not aiming for. So we can have a unit for that, but what is more likely to happen is we need to support the 5 Sisters and the Immolator. They may be able to clear a lightly held objective with their flamer weapons, but it is going to fall as soon as the enemy counterattacks. We are merely delaying the enemy. So we need to counterattack their counterattack and hold the objective after that. So we want something that is tough and that can kill the enemy. Arco-Flagellants fit the bill. They recently went up in points following the January 2024 balance patch, but they are still good. Despite their toughness 3, their 4+ feel no pain will keep them in the fight. And they also have 2 wounds, so a damage 1 or damage 2 enemy weapons are going to need to succeed against that 4+ feel no pain. They're faster than normal units, at 7-inch movement, that is Eldar speed, and their flails have a lot going for them. Sustained hits 1 and twin linked, which lets you reroll wound rolls. To make it a bit better, I would add a Preacher. Ideally, this version of the Preacher, which has the Zealot Vindicator, which is a heavy flamer crossed with a massive chainsword. Just a reminder that the Preacher's Zealot ability only works on the Preacher model. It is not every model in the unit, so not every Arco-Flagellant is going to get extra strength and extra attacks. The +1 to wound is very nice. Against a lot of enemy units, the Arco-Flagellants will be wounding on 3s regardless, and they have twin linked, but the Preacher means that they can hit tougher things as well. So far, all we really have for anti-tank is the Exorcist, but with the Preacher, we are wounding tanks on a 5+, with rerolls to wound from the twin linked. It doesn't matter that those are AP0 attacks, attrition can take down bigger things. This works better on 3+ save monsters and vehicles, not those with a 2+ save. They are twice as likely to pass the save, which is just too tough, because they go from a 2 out of 6 chance of failing to a 1 out of 6 chance of failing. If you need more damage, and you will against bigger targets, then you use the Extremist trigger word. It's worth doing unless you are very sure you will wipe the enemy out, because in future turns, in the Hallowed Martyrs detachment, you get a +1 to hit. That's very valuable when you don't reroll hits and are normally hitting on a 4+. With the points drop to Repentia following the January points change, you may want to swap Arco-Flagellant for Repentia, but you can't then add a Preacher. However, with the Novitiates, we now have 2 squishy units, and the Repentia would probably require a Rhino of their own, which puts them very close to the same points cost as Arco-Flagellants on foot. Okay, the Arco-Flagellants are not really anti-tank. Some cheap anti-tank for Sisters is a Penitent engine. I would go for the Twin Penitent Buzzsaw because that is strength 10, and then it's twin linked, so that any fails to wound, like from dreaded ones, you can reroll them. The Penitent engine can advance and charge, This is a light vehicle, but it is a great distraction because of the screaming and the fire and the buzzsaws, and it all looks very scary. If you have the command point for +1 to wound as a stratagem, then it wounds most enemy vehicles, the type that you usually see at 1000 points, on a 3+. Just don't let it get charged by an enemy monster. So here's an example. Say some guy called Neil has a Screamer Killer in his army, and that is going to tear apart the Penitent engine. So the Sisters player, let's call her Beatrix, she will use the Exorcist to soften up the monster and have the Penitent engine stay hidden. When required, it can then go very fast with its 8-inch move and advance and charge. Think of the Penitent engine as a bullet to be spent, a sinner to be redeemed. Don't feel sad for them, because they are not a battle sister. Although you should feel even less sorry for the last unit in this list. A sister of battle who failed, became a Repentia, and then fled? There are no third chances. It's surprising that they get a second chance in the 41st millennium. A Mortifier is tougher than a Penitent engine. It is there to hold an objective and delay the enemy. While it is tougher, it can't advance and charge. So you get to an objective by advancing, use a miracle dice if you need to, and be a blocker for enemy units. As we're not rushing super close to the enemy, I wouldn't have the heavy flamers. The Penitent flamers on the Penitent engine are assault, which means it can fire them after advancing. But on the Mortifier, a heavy bolter may be better. We're holding back a bit more, not necessarily going to be charging, but that is another way to slow down the enemy if they have weapons that can't easily damage you. And I would still take the Penitent Buzzblades because the strength 10 and damage 2, that's what we want for scything away traitor marines. We already have a lot of other units for taking out enemy infantry. So that brings us to exactly 1000 points with this list. 10 Battle Sisters, an Immolator to split them, 5 Seraphim, an Exorcist, a Palatine with the Blade of St. Eleanor, 10 Novitiates, a Sororitas Rhino, 10 Archoflagelants with a Preacher, a Penitent Engine, and a Mortifier. Now you know one possible 1000 point list, and importantly, you know how to use all of the units that are in that list and what they're going to be doing. Now before I continue with other lists, to give you more ideas of which other units are viable in 1000 points, I just want to mention that I do have a Ko-fi. That's the link at the bottom, so if this is really useful to you, please do drop me some tip money because it helps me get through the day to make the next video for you all. You can do one-off amounts, or like Patreon, and Ko-fi is basically a similar thing, you can pay for a monthly subscription to help me out. Thank you. Right. So that is one possible list and some tactics for how to use the different units. But I want to look at some other units and suggest why we probably don't want them in 1000 points. The Triumph of St. Katherine seems really cool, but there's been a change in its rules so it can no longer filter all of your miracle dice through it and a Dialogus to get them all into 6s. Just 2. It is a lot of points. Although it's 125 by itself, it's almost certainly wanting a bodyguard around it, so that's another 100 points for a squad of Battle Sisters. And they have to be on foot. You cannot put the Triumph of St. Katherine in a Rhino. Because the Triumph's abilities are all aura-based, it encourages your units to group up around it. And at 1000 points, you need to be spread out, so you will almost certainly always be out of range of the support auras. And it is not worth running the Triumph alone, even at 1000 points. Las cannons still exist, even if the Titan-sized weapons don't normally. And if the Triumph isn't inside a bodyguard unit, you're relying a lot on a 4+ invulnerable save to not immediately die. We could include a Dialogus. That can be a much cheaper miracle support unit compared to the Triumph, and if you had Retributors, that unit could go in an Immolator with a Dialogus to support. Just remember that 5 Retributors cost more than 10 Sisters, and you can't split a Retributor unit up. If you have a Dialogus and you want to include them, in the half Battle Sister squad we put in the Immolator, you could switch out a Flamer for a Melter Gun, add the Dialogus, and then the Dialogus could make sure that that Melter Gun hit so that it is effective for the Immolator's reroll to wound ability. And the Dialogus is a pretty cheap support character. If you have a few points left over, rather than looking for an enhancement, go for a Dialogus. The Imagifier is a support unit that you probably won't need at 1000 points. There are not that many AP-2 attacks around, and much like the Triumph, there are not going to be as many units around your force for them to benefit from the Litany of Deeds ability to get better miracle dice. The Hospitaller gives better protection for one unit and can be good at 1000 points considering the amount of small arms fire going around. The Sacrosanct squad, I'm still not a fan, because they're Celestians but without guns. But the Celestian Sacrosancts are probably better performing at 1000 points than 2000 points. They do want to have a Canoness or Palatine with them. It's a shame their rule doesn't allow Dogmaters. That would be a great character to have put with them. But despite their rule, and their save, and their invulnerable save, they are a very weak unit. 1 wound with toughness 3. They are going to want to be in a Rhino for extra protection. And with a Rhino having a transport capacity of 12, you could have 5 Sacrosancts, a character, and fill the other spaces with 5 Repentia. So here's an alternative list to the one I've suggested. This one has lots of small units that are going to distract the enemy and take objectives that they have left open. How many players are going to be thinking that they need to shoot their battle cannon at 2 Death Cult assassins and hope to get past the 5+ invulnerable save, when the alternative is to fire at the Paragon Warsuits that are getting much closer? We have a Palatine and 10 Dominions on foot. These are not holding down the home objective, they are going to scout towards an objective before turn 1. If we can get it early, we can start scoring it as soon as possible. If we had split the unit with an Immolator, then the 4 special weapons like Stormbolters and Melterguns would join the Palatine, along with the Simulacrum to generate more miracle dice from purging the enemies of the Divine Emperor. Ha ha ha! The other 5 Dominions would have then been able to scout to a single objective. They would hold it, probably after the 5 Dominions in an Immolator had cleared it. But Dominions on foot, whether it's 5 of them because you've used an Immolator or 10 of them, you want to deploy them last. Then you can see which objectives your opponent is not putting many units towards. The Palatine should be able to kill them with Dominion weapon support. Remember, no flamers. Don't look sad. Torrent weapons can't benefit from lethal hits, so it is better to use Stormbolters and Melterguns. After defeating the enemy units and claiming the objective, the 10 Dominions with their assault weapons will want to move on to the next objective. You can advance with a reroll and then still shoot. You just won't be able to charge afterwards. The job of holding the claimed objective falls to the smaller units in the army. For armoured support, rather than an Exorcist, I went for the Castigator. Generally, it's considered that the twin autocannons are the better choice, but whatever gun you want works for you. Or magnets. Magnets also work. Because we have the heavy bolters that are damage 2, I would put the Dominions with Melterguns. Fighting enemies with 2 wounds like Chaos Marines, that can be done by the heavy bolters of the Castigator. The Castigator twin autocannons are rerolling wounds against everything because they are twin linked, but it is let down by the low armor penetration. The Dominion's Melterguns have armor penetration -4 for getting through vehicles. We have the lethal hits of the Palatine, and as many miracle dice of a 6 you can throw at them to get through the toughness of monsters and vehicles. Most of them are toughness 10, a Meltergun is strength 9. That is something sister players have to live with in this edition. We have 10 Repentia in a Rhino, so rather than the Arcoflagellants of the previous list, we're going with Repentia. We could have had them on foot and outflanking, but this relies on having an enemy near the board edge, and you having a 6 of a miracle dice to help you make that charge. I would only plan to take that risk if you had an Imagifier on the battlefield, making it more likely that you'll have a better miracle dice. Alternatively, the Litanies of Faith on any character, which lets you re-roll a miracle dice. That works on the Palatine and the Dominions, because when 6 Dominions are dead, that's a unit that's below half strength. Then the Litanies of Faith let you reroll 3 dice. But still, we're relying on all of that happening before the Repentia on foot come in from reserve. So that is one of our big units. And remember, the Rhino can be performing secondary actions, like Cleanse, or getting to a board quarter to score a secondary objective. Another big hard-hitting unit are 3 Warsuits. They have gotten cheaper. Earlier in 10th edition, the only way to run them was have 1 unit of 3 Warsuits with Morvenn Vahl. As the points have gone up in Vahl, but the points have gone down for Warsuits, having 3 Warsuits is more viable. Putting Vahl in the unit as well is costing too many points for the size of game we're playing. And remember, we can get a Mortifier with equal toughness, though not equal save or invulnerable save, for half the points. Morvenn Vahl's ability only works when she's leading Paragon Warsuit units, and while you could have her by herself, then we enter the Triumph of St. Katherine issue where you've got a character by itself relying on its invulnerable save to survive enemy las cannons. That would be a lot of points for trying to run Vahl by herself. So just the 3 Paragon Warsuits. They're pretty good alone. Remember that they have the grenades keyword, so they can use grenades, and they are a vehicle, so if you have 1 War Mace, That's a really good tank shock. We have 2 Crusaders just as a unit to go on your home objective. That's the sort of model you can make yourself from other bits. They won't stand up to anything that the enemy throws at you, but it's a really cheap way to hold your home objective, assuming that there's no deep striking enemy units. And if they are deep striking something big like 5 Terminators, that's a lot of points investment they've just thrown away to kill 2 little dudes and take 1 objective. Terminators are slow. We can exploit this. We have 2 lots of 2 assassins. 1 unit of 2 can go into the Rhino with the Repentia, and then, when the 2 units get out and charge an enemy unit, preferably something big like a monster, then we can use the distraction stratagem, and all of the attacks of that monster have to go onto the 2 assassins. So Neil's Screamer Killer is killing something of very little value in Beatrix's army compared to the much more expensive and valuable Repentia. This pair of assassins can also try and be assassins. They can try and use their precision attacks on their swords to kill weaker enemy characters. Models with 3 wounds or 4 wounds. You know, like the Battle Sister characters. That kind of level. Or they can perform actions and be in table quarters. They move pretty fast. We also have 2 assassins that want to be in reserve, so they can come on from reserves and get into a table quarter for a secondary mission, or be behind enemy lines. But that's not the only unit we can have behind enemy lines. We have 5 Seraphim that do their usual thing. You'll notice we also have Celestine in this list. You could have chosen Ephrael Stern. The 5 Seraphim are going to be separate to Celestine, but they don't have to be. Celestine has an advantage as a character unit. You see, while she is by herself, as in the Saint plus the 2 Gemini, that is not an attached unit. When you're making shooting attacks at an attached unit, you can't put the damage on a character. As Saint Celestine's Thruple is not an attached unit, we can put the damage on Saint Celestine herself. There's a lot of wounds there, and we can take advantage of the Gemini ability to get a 4+ feel no pain. This is a very tough lady, and when the Celestine model dies on a 2+, she gets back up and rejoins her Gemini. She has full wounds left, so at that point you could instead switch and put damage onto the Gemini models, because when both Gemini are down, Saint Celestine can benefit from the Blood of Martyrs ability to get +1 to wound. And if you wanted your feel no pain back, you can cry some tears and bring back a Gemini. There's a lot of wound application exploitation you can do with Celestine. And she's very tough, with 5 wounds, a 4+ feel no pain, and a 4+ invulnerable save. She can take a lot more damage than you would think. Last of all, we have 3 Archoflagellants. They can also stay on the home objective with the 2 Crusaders, if you know that the enemy has some deep striking unit, but it's a lighter one, like 5 Assault Marines, or Assault Intercessors with jump packs. Or they can run ahead of the Paragon Warsuits and act as a screen to anything that would charge them. While the Paragon Warsuits can fall back and shoot and charge, we don't want an enemy to charge us because then the enemy will fight first, and probably kill a Warsuit. The Archoflagellants can perform secondary actions, because these are yet another small unit that can be available for them. Also, if they die, same as with the Assassins and the Crusaders, they generate a miracle dice on death. If you want more miracle dice, lots of small units are a great way to exploit our army special rule. Now for something completely different. If you think, Christian, wait, I have none of these units. What I have is the combat patrol and a willingness to get a bigger army. What do? How do I build it into a 1000 point list? Well, you know that you need some units that can kill, some to hold primary objectives, some to delay the enemy, and you need units to support and improve your other units, and some to perform those secondary actions. There is a video of mine on how to start collecting sisters, but here is a 1000 point list. We know we have the Canoness, 10 Sisters, 5 Repentia, a Rhino, 3 Archoflagellants, a Penitent Engine, and 5 Seraphim. The 10 Sisters are going to be walking up the board. The Rhino is for the Repentia. And another squad, perhaps this is a good place for Celestian Sacrosancts. The Canoness joins them, and you have quite a tough unit. Now with the protection of a Rhino. The 3 Archoflagellants are there to just sit on the home objective and hold that. 6 wounds with a 4+ feel no pain could survive an attack from the enemy. Potentially. We have Seraphim to attack the enemy base, but we're also going to want a squad of 5 Zephyrim. The reason we choose Zephyrim is because then the special pistol weapons like the Hand Flamers or the Inferno pistols that you get in the box they can be put onto the monopose sisters that don't have special weapons. So now you have 5 Seraphim that are able to actually be Seraphim. And you have 5 Zephyrim that can also dive in and use power swords to cut up the enemy. For anti-tank, we have an Exorcist. We love the Exorcist. People should have more Exorcists. To annoy the enemy and get in the way, especially if they're a Chaos faction, or we want to get rid of some characters, the Demonifuge is lovely for murdering those characters. Or she can follow up behind the Battle Sisters and use Heroic Intervention if the Battle Sisters get charged. For further protection on the Battle Sisters, a Hospitaller. 10 Sisters with a 3+ save and a 5+ feel no pain survive surprisingly long in 1000 point games. And to round out the list, 2 more Penitent engines. We're going for 2 because that is how many you get in the box. Now, it's not a good idea to run them in a unit of 2 in the Hallowed Martyrs detachment. That is a common mistake that new Sisters players make. The Buzzsaws give us more anti-tank, and if one of them gets charged because it's out of position and it dies, that's okay, we have 2 more for counter-attacking. Take that, Neil's hypothetical Screamer Killer. And here's a final list that is once again completely different. Having lots of vehicles, a Mechanized Sisters list. That will give you the speed to get around the board, and it is very tough. If the enemy has taken lots of anti-infantry firepower, you will be pretty happy. We have a Palatine with a Blade of St. Eleanor, joining 10 Dominions, all of which can fit inside a Repressor. That's a Legends unit, so it's valid for everything except tournament play. We have 10 Arcoflagellants and a Preacher in a Rhino. We have 5 Retributors and a Dialogus in an Immolator, and we have an Exorcist for support. This is 1000 points. Now, how you use this list is explained in far more detail in a dedicated video all about playing Mechanized Sisters. That should see you right for 1000 points. My darlings and viewers, have a great day with the Sisterhood.